Hi, I'm Paul Feiner.
I'm Pauline Mosley. Welcome.
And we have a really interesting program, especially if you love trees, or if you don't love trees, because our guest today is Sven Hoeger, and Sven is our Forestry Officer. And could you tell us what a Forestry Officer is?
Person that gets blamed for everything. No, very seriously, the Forestry Officer administers the tree code, the tree ordinance that the town has, and it means if you have a tree in the yard, even if it's a dead tree, by the way, you want to cut that tree down, you should get a permit to cut it down, and it's for safety reasons and neighborhood issues, and we also require that the trees get replaced. And that's the function, and of course if you don't do that, then I get a report of it, and I have to go out there and issue a violation.
And how long have you been doing this?
The ordinance has been in effect for 3 years, and that's how long I've been doing it.
But you've been involved in the community for a while, because I've known you since I've been in public office.
I've lived here for 35 years, yeah.
And were you always like an environmentalist?
I'm an ecologist. I had my own company, and when I closed the company and this came up, I said, well, it's a no-brainer. It's a part-time position, so I'm not available all the time.
Right. Some people get really nervous when they see a tree that seems like it's large, and they're worried that it's going to fall down. Could they just remove it if it's on their property?
That is an issue that comes up a lot. And unfortunately, just because a person thinks or a resident thinks that the tree is dangerous doesn't mean it's necessarily a hazardous tree. And we distinguish between hazardous trees and normal trees. A hazardous tree, there are certain criteria that have to be met, and a professional arborist, like I am a professional arborist right now, and there are lots of them out there in private practice and associated with tree services, they have certain criteria by which they assess a tree, whether or not it's hazardous or not. Hazardous means it is an imminent danger for you. If it's not an imminent danger, it might be dangerous, but it won't hurt you right away. It won't hurt you for the next month, next 2 months, 3 months, 5 years. But it could still be something you want to remove. You get the permission to remove it, but you don't get an expedited permission, that's all. But the problem that a lot of residents have is that they see a branch fall down from a tree, and all of a sudden the tree is hazardous. And that does not meet the professional criteria.
Right. Now, I have a couple of questions. Thank you so much. For our viewing audience, I'd like to know, or speak on their behalf, the trees that are replaced, is it of less or equal value? And does the resident have a say into what tree? Like if I had an oak, do you replace it with an oak of that particular value, or do I get a lesser tree value? How does that work?
Well, tree value is a very loaded question. There is financial value. If you had the lumber, we sold the lumber, there's a value to that. We don't look at that. There is value to the tree shading your house. We don't look at that. There is value for the tree removing carbon dioxide from the air.
Right.
That is something we're concerned with, because overall the climate is changing,
Right.
and trees have a capacity to remove carbon dioxide from the air. So that is a function that the town board, Paul Weiner, of course, sharing that, has decided is a very important issue that we have to deal with, and we don't want to lose canopy, which removes carbon from the air. Similarly, trees provide a service in mitigating stormwater. When it rains, the water usually, when it's a light rain, it usually just seeps into the ground. Very little of it goes into the streams. And when we have a big rainfall, inch or more of rainfall per square foot, those rainfalls then accumulate, and then they run off the surface and go into the streams. And trees in particular have a very good ability to infiltrate as much of this water into the ground as possible. So they loosen up the soil, they have pathways really into the ground, and so the water goes into the ground. And So they mitigate the runoff, the stormwater runoff. And that's the number we're looking at. That's measured in gallons per year. And so if you move that oak that you mentioned,
Right.
we measure the tree. That's an arborist usually doing it. Or you can
Right.
look at the circumference of the tree, can give
Right.
that to me, or the diameter of the tree, and we measure it at breast height, so 4.5 feet off the ground. And that is an issue. You can take which website that you can find that tells you how many gallons this tree absorbs a year, or mitigates a year, or how much carbon it removes from the air each year. There are various websites out there, and we recommend the one that we use for the town, but it doesn't mean you have to use that one.
I see.
Right. I had another question. Let's say my neighbor has a tree that is dying, and you agree that it's dying. Call my neighbor. I say, please remove it. I'm really nervous that the tree's going to fall on my property.
Exactly.
And they say, I don't want to do it. Could the town force them to do it?
Unfortunately not.
And because I get these type of complaints a lot. And what advice would you give to somebody who's really nervous? They're saying, I live here and my neighbor's tree possibly could injure my family, could destroy property. What do they do?
I can tell you I'm in that same position myself. I've complained to my neighbors at the homeowners association, and they just simply said, too bad, insurance will pay for it. It's very unfortunate, but
That's unfortunate.
it's a reaction that neighbors get a lot. And the town has advised me to give out advice that I don't really like, but I have to give out, and that is either talk to your neighbor, potentially offer to pay for the removal, or hire a lawyer and put them on notice.
And I think what I've said to people is put them on notice and mention that there's been lawsuits where people or municipalities have had to pay $9-10 million, including Greenburgh. When I first got in years ago, there was a tree at Cotswold Park, Central Avenue, where the Midway Shopping Center is, across from the Midway Shopping Center. An Edgemont Civic Association, the Cotswold neighborhood, they have like a park, and a tree fell, killed somebody, seriously injured somebody, and this was probably in the 1990s. It was over $9 million, judgment. So if you put somebody on notice, then they're responsible if they do nothing. Now, after that lawsuit, we learned a lesson, and we have a company. We've hired people to trim trees, cut trees. Are we doing enough as a town?
Well, I'm only responsible for private properties, residents that apply for tree removals on private properties. The town has a separate division, the Public Works Department, and there's actually the Parks Department, two separate entities that have their own arborists, and they take care of their trees. And
So,
we get a lot of calls. I get calls because people don't know this. They call me and say there's a tree in my front yard that is probably on town property or in town right-of-way, I should say. The tree is rotted. What can you do about it? Can you come out and look at it? I forward this information then to the Public Works Department, and they usually send somebody out to look at it.
Right. And how expensive is it to cut down a tree?
Oh, can vary. First of all, trees vary in size quite a bit.
Exactly.
And
The big ones.
the big ones can be thousands of dollars.
Right, and that's why
thousands of dollars.
That's why some of the neighbors don't really want to, want to remove it. But one loophole, actually, advice: if a tree is over a wire, then I've generally contacted Con Ed, and Con Ed will, at no cost, they will remove the tree sometimes.
If it is over the Con Ed wire,
The Con Ed wire.
not over the house connection.
Right.
House connection, the resident is responsible.
I'm wondering, and I just thought of this, if Con Ed, if there's a wire, do they cut down the tree, or do they just cut down the top of the
branches.
the branches over the
You
wires.
see me laughing. Our town ordinance prohibits the topping of trees. Con Edison's contractor does it routinely, and he doesn't get fined for it because he has a blanket permit for all the tree work that needs to be done.
Because
over the
utilities don't have to
Utilities
comply with.
don't have to comply with. Well, they don't have to comply with for the trees that are over the wires.
Why don't we, allow topping of trees? Actually, I should be asking myself that since I probably am responsible for passing the law. But what's the reason for this?
It's pretty much the same reason as if you were to amputate somebody's leg or arm. They could get infections get into that if you don't treat the wound very well. But there is no wound treatment really available for trees, especially if you top the top off, the water piles on it, bacteria settle there, fungal spores settle there, and eventually, while the tree doesn't die right away, and sometimes even makes sprouts, water sprouts all over the place, the fungus oftentimes settles in and makes its way all the way down the trunk, and eventually the stem is hollowed out, or weak, I should say. And in a good storm, especially if there are new branches on top of it, that tree could fall over.
Yeah, I had another situation. I just wanted to speak to you. A couple of years ago, I think I wrote to you. There was a woman. They lived off near where the web field, one of the side streets, and a tree was encroaching on their property, on the building.
On the building,
The roots of the tree,
Yeah.
and they were concerned, and they wanted to remove the tree, but it was a healthy tree. But sometimes as the roots.
That particular, I remember this.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was whoever built the house when it was built planted a nice oak tree 5 feet from the house. By the time they applied for the removal of this tree, which by the way was granted, obviously, the tree had pushed into the wall and the basement wall, and it was really way too close to the house. So when builders build houses or landscapers plant gardens and landscapes, they should put the trees these distances away from the house, not put it right by the house, especially oak trees.
And these are things that a lot of people don't really think of.
Right.
So if you're buying a house, you might want to look and see how close a tree is to the house, because it could be. How long does it take usually for
Those
the roots to impact, say, property?
I don't know that for sure, but I can tell you
Over
that
time.
a squirrel planted an acorn in my front yard. Town right away, by the way. But I liked it, this little tree, and I fertilized it a little bit, and that was in '97. So that is, well, let's say 26 years ago now. Okay, the tree is this big.
Wow.
It's an oak, beautiful oak. I like it, but it's far away from the house enough so that it doesn't impact the house. What I'm saying is, in 26 years, an oak can grow to a sizable tree.
How do people get in touch with you?
Oh, they can go on the website, and under the Department for Community Development and Conservation, they should find my contact information as the Forestry Officer. Or they could call me, and I can give you the number.
What's the number?
989-1536.
Boy, this is so interesting. Are there aspects of the law that you think should be changed?
Plenty.
Like, could you give us an example?
Yes. Actually, you're going to get my report. I have to write a yearly report. You're going to get that in a few days, actually. Before I came over here, I was writing it. One major bone of contention for many applicants is the fact that they have to notify their neighbors. Not just that they have to notify the neighbors, they have to notify. In the code, it provides that every time I send a written communication to an applicant, that communication has to be shared with the neighbors. And typically we send a preliminary approval, so the neighbors are informed, and then we send an approval.
Right.
And that approval has to be shared with the neighbors again, and each time the applicant has to wait 10 days, 10 business days. So 10 and 10 is 20 business days a month. Before they get their permit, a month goes by, and a lot of people are upset about that.
Right.
You know, that's one of the major complaints I'm getting. Another complaint is possibly the replacement requirement, but I don't think that's a selfish complaint. I don't want to pay for an extra tree now,
Right,
but
right.
it is for the community. It's best if we do keep the replacements.
And when people have to replace it, what's sort of like the average cost of a replacement?
It goes back to the original question from Pauline. How's that?
Pauline, that's
Pauline,
right.
sorry.
Yeah, perfect.
From Pauline. The environmental value that a tree has. You calculated your oak tree, for
Right.
example. Let's say it has 1,000 gallons of stormwater and 100 pounds of carbon that it sequesters. The requirement is that you have to replace 90% of that. So 900 gallons and 90 pounds, right? We have a whole list that you can, we provide you, the applicant with a list and say, pick from this list. It tells you how many gallons this particular tree gets credited for and how many pounds of carbon it gets credited for. And you have to cobble them together, and the price depends on how many trees you plant.
This is another question that I just thought of.
Yeah.
Sometimes developers, they want to develop property, and they figure, I'll just remove the trees like in the middle of the night, or not in the middle of the night when on the weekend when nobody's looking. I'll get my fines, and this way I don't have to deal with the bureaucracy or the delays, and then I'll build my property. I'll build what I want to do. What happens if somebody cuts down a tree without permission, and they basically figure it's a cost of business to get the fine? Are the fines steep enough?
I don't determine the fines. The fines are written into the code, and if I get a call, somebody cut down trees, I go out, look at it, and try to look at the owner of the property and let them know they should have applied for a permit.
But if the tree's already cut down, you say, sorry,
know.
I'm sorry.
Well, we are trying to be nice. And if the property owner cooperates with me, they get a violation, but they don't necessarily go to court.
I see.
The violation means they have to resolve the issue. They cut the tree down without a permit. Now they have to replace it, but not at 90%. Now they have to replace it at 120%.
Oh,
of the
wow.
environmental. So it's a little extra 30% of replacement value.
So if it's actually a gigantic tree, it could be a very, very expensive.
Could be expensive, yes.
So developers should be on notice that this could be.
Well, if it's the developer, it's a totally different story because they usually have to go through an approval process, and we get the lawyers involved. Quite frankly, if it's a development, if it's a private person, I usually deal with them on a one-to-one basis, and in 90% of the cases, we don't have to go to court. But I have to go to court once or twice a year, just because somebody doesn't want to cooperate.
Right. How do you deal with if a tree is on person's property, but they don't have a watering system, and that tree dies, and then you replace it, and then it dies again? You just keep replacing and replacing
I
it?
guess so. I mean, they're required to guarantee the survival of the tree.
So the town is still, even though the town is required to replace the trees.
No, the town is not required. The town is requiring it.
Oh, it's requiring it. The town doesn't. Is the town responsible for the watering of the tree?
The applicant replaces the tree and is responsible for its survival.
I see.
What if somebody wants to put solar panels and the trees are making it difficult for them to install the solar panels?
Yeah, that is an easy one, because the town wants people to use alternative energy, and for us it's a no-brainer. However, the removal will be approved, but they have to be on contract with a solar company. So we don't just say, just because I want to put solar on, I'll tell you I want to put solar on. A verbal, it doesn't do it for me. I need a contract, a signed contract saying I'm going to put solar.
One of the most irritating things for people is having to pay a permit fee. People really, it's funny, there's little things that really are irritating to residents, but we have to do it. How expensive are the permits?
Negligible. Sorry. Sorry to say negligible, because it is very, I mean, the first tree is $25. The second tree is $25. And then it's $50 for each additional tree. A little steeper, so that try to keep it at a minimum, you know? That's what the intent is of the first $25 for the first 2 trees. And I should say, may add this here, what I didn't touch on yet is the size of the tree also matters. If it's a tree that is 8 inches in diameter or bigger, that's when you have to have a permit. Smaller trees usually don't have a permit unless, and this is important, unless it's on a very steep slope, then it's a 6-inch tree that you have to report on, or anything bigger. And if it's a wetland or wetland buffer, 100 foot away from an intermittent stream or pond or lake or whatever, the Somme River, whatever it is, 100 feet away from that, within that zone, every tree over 4 inches is regulated.
Does the town have like a easy to understand pamphlet, not in legalese, explaining all the things that we have to do in relating to trees? Because I would think that the code, if you're not a lawyer, could be a little intimidating or complicated. But if we'd have something like really easy to understand, it might be helpful. Or maybe we have it.
The town doesn't have an official pamphlet, but whenever somebody asks me, it calls me up and asks me, I sent them easy to understand information.
Well, you know what? This might be actually a good summer internship project. Now, you see, now we got a good idea, because maybe because this is something that people
need to know.
People would need to know, and if we have a good intern who could simplify with questions and answers, I think that would be really great. So now I have a new idea for the summer or for the spring, if I get an intern in the spring. So far, this is really interesting. I'm learning, a lot in terms of invasive trees. Is that a big issue?
Not getting into the environmental issue here of invasiveness. I think everybody understands invasive means not in our normal ecology, not in our normal. There are quite a few tree species out there which we consider invasive. The state has a website where they list the trees. The city of New York has one for its park system. And we go by these lists. Those trees that are on there, if they're deemed invasive, the town does not charge a fee. So the $25 for that tree will not get charged. And the benefit is you don't have to replace it either. So in other words, there's their savings. You still have to pay the tree service to take down the tree, but you don't have to replace the tree because it's an invasive species, and we don't want you to replace an invasive species with an invasive species.
Right.
We don't make you plant a native species either.
What about homes that have trees as dividers? And what if someone wants to say, I don't want the trees anymore because I don't want to deal with all the leaves. I'm getting old, so I want to take down all the trees and replace it with the fence. Now, what if for the neighborhood and the culture of the neighborhood, everybody in that area has trees as dividers, but this new neighbor coming in doesn't want that? How does your office handle that, or what advice do you give to that? Especially if it's not one tree, but it's like, say, 10 trees, whole row of trees. It's going to affect the environment, as you said, the carbon monoxide, all these different things, and also the beauty of the richness of the neighborhood. But now they want to replace it with the fence.
Does the fence have any environmental value?
No.
Well, so what are they going to do? They have to replant.
I see. See, this is important. Like you said, this is important because so if someone didn't know that and they just had all those trees removed, they would be fined,
first
right?
of all,
What would your
if they
office
remove
do?
them without a permit, they have to replace them at a higher rate replacement rate than if they had applied for it.
Interesting.
And they're on the hook anyway. And if they don't want it, and we have to take them to court, the judge will definitely make them. And they have to pay a fine.
And
And the tree service is on the hook too. Because the tree services,
This is
that
amazing.
may have to
Wow.
say that a lot of landscapers still haven't gotten the message, but tree services that are generally working in the town have gotten the message, and they tell their clients, I can't just take this tree down. You have to have a permit for it.
do you recommend tree cutting companies? You know, let's say somebody knows that there's a tree that needs to be cut down. Could you recommend them, or do we have a list of
Let me see who paid me the most. No, of course not. I can't. I can't.
So we don't recommend anybody.
Can't do that.
Are we able to give names of tree companies and say we're not recommending anybody, but these are companies that have serviced the town?
I've had in one case in these 3 years that we're doing this. Rarely do I get asked to begin with, and I basically, if I get asked, I say go to the internet and see who works in town. In one case, they asked me if I could give them at least 5 reputable services. So I gave them a whole list of 8, but I didn't pick any one of them. I just said these are services that have worked in town.
Are there, with consumer issues, are there any things that people should be aware of or ask, if you're looking for a tree cutting service, is there things that you would recommend people do? Could they get a second opinion, or do some companies take advantage, or?
I routinely tell people, don't just get one quote, get 3 or 4 quotes. It's a competitive field. That's all I say. I can't recommend any particular company over another.
That's good. Well, one reason why I like you is you are a person of integrity.
Thank you.
And you've always been, and I know that you do what you think is right rather than, and without any political influence. I could write to you or call you, and if you think I'm right, you'll help the person. If you think the constituent who I'm speaking for is wrong, you'll disagree, but you do what the code says, and I think you're definitely. I would vouch for your integrity. I'd bet my life on it. So
That's very strong statement.
It is a strong statement.
It is.
But I think we're really lucky to have you. We only have a minute left. Is there anything we didn't cover?
Not that I see. I mean, we covered the most important points, I think.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for your service, to the town. We're lucky to have you.
And I'm
Absolutely.
glad to be here.
Great. And again, could you just give us the phone number in case people want to contact you?
914-989-1536.
Great. Thank you. I'm
Thank you.
Paul Feiner, and
I'm Pauline Mosley. Thank you again.
great.